3:47 a.m., Strait of Hormuz. A supertanker bursts into flames, the sea ablaze, and the world witnesses a resounding Iranian victory. But at choke points like Hormuz, the greatest danger isn't the explosion. It's the moment a system is forced to reveal itself. That's the paradox of this crisis. What appears to be a devastating blow to America could be the signal that unlocks the counterattack Washington has been waiting for. Because in modern warfare, it's not just about who fires first. It's about who loses control of the silence after that first shot. Hormuz has never been a place where sheer power automatically prevails. The narrow waterway, the rocky coastline, the dense concentration of civilian ships, the time for a reaction compressed to minutes. This is an environment where a single misidentification can turn into a strategic catastrophe. Therefore, this video is not just about an attack. We will decipher how the US transformed the initial shock into a complete counterattack architecture. From satellites, early warning aircraft, F-35S, Aegis, to electronic warfare and long-range strikes. The real question is, at Hormuz, did the US win by firepower or by turning data into the most fearsome weapon on the battlefield? In the eyes of international news agencies, the Al-Salmi fire was a disaster. But from the perspective of systems warfare planners at the Pentagon, it was an invaluable bright spot. Because in the era of stealth and camouflage warfare, the greatest challenge for a superpower is not destroying the target, but forcing the enemy to come out of the shadows themselves. Before the attack, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, possessed an absolute advantage: uncertainty. They hid in the radar blind spots of coastal rocks, used civilian fishing boats as shields, and kept all communication networks radio silent. The US could not fire on such vague targets. But to coordinate a complex attack like Al-Salmi, Iran had to activate its entire operational ecosystem. Drones cannot fly without command stations. Fast boats cannot navigate without radar guidance. And dispersed units cannot coordinate without relay communication nodes to increase the load. The moment Al-Salmi was hit, Iran inadvertently pressed the lights up button on its entire defense structure. A massive target hit creates a crisis, but it also creates the most valuable thing for a modern counterattack: a behavioral signature. The US no longer needs to search for every launch pad hidden in the fog. They only need to observe where the command source is coming from, which radar station is locking onto the target, and which disguised vehicles have just switched from civilian to combat mode. Al-Salmi, in the logic of this operation, is not just a victim. It acts as a massive data decoy, forcing the adversary to expose its organizational structure and network operation in real time. As Iran completed its strike and retreated into the shadows, they believed they had re-established anonymity, but they were wrong. At this very moment, the US began constructing a multi-layered perception dome, not with a single all-seeing eye, but with the integration of data fragments from space to the surface of the sea. The top layer is the KH-11 keyhole. Don't mistake this for an omniscience eye, capable of live streaming every corner. The true meaning of the KH-11 is static verification. It provides snapshots with a resolution of 10 centimeters, helping the fleet confirm the field layout, the location of recently opened bunkers, the tracks of missile launchers in the sand, and points of unusual activity that radar cannot scan. The KH-11 is the foundation, confirming that the target is not just an electronic signal, but a physical entity. Below orbit, the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye acts as the conductor of the battlefield. If satellites give us a view of material, then the E-2D gives us a view of behavior. With its AN/APY-9 radar, it not only sees thousands of dots of light on the sea, but it's intelligent enough to classify which are fishing vessels moving according to their daily routines, and which are combat assets behaving according to military logic. The E-2D is the first layer of filtering, separating civilian chaos from the order of war. Below the early warning layer, F-35 fighters act as mobile sensor nodes. They don't shout with radar to reveal their location. They silently collect data. The F-35 confirms heat emissions from drone engines and weak radio waves from control stations that long-range radars might miss. These are the close-up eyes, providing the final pieces of the puzzle about the location of the most elusive targets in the mountain passes. Finally, all this fragmented data is fed into the Aegis combat system. Here, a data fusion algorithm takes place. Aegis takes snapshots of the KH-11, adds the behavioral labels of the E-2D, and combines them with the precise coordinates of the F-35 to create a single digital reality. Iran tried to hide in the chaos, but the US responded with a seamless perceptual dome. At this point, the fog of war has dissipated. The enemy thought they were still hiding behind the waves and cliffs, but in reality, they were present on the US fleet's screens in the highest resolution. A perceptual dome had been erected, and now the US was moving on to the next step, classification for control. But seeing the target among a crowd of civilian vessels was only half the problem. How could the US avoid accidental firing and maintain absolute control? Iran employs a calculated tactic, deploying inexpensive drones, unmanned speedboats, and camouflaged vehicles, forcing them to move in close proximity to international transport ships. In Iran's logic, if the US opens fire, they risk accidentally shooting civilians, a political disaster. If the US hesitates, they will be overwhelmed by hundreds of simultaneous attacks. This is the war fog that Tehran deliberately creates to tie down its fleet. But the US network solves this problem not with the naked eye, but with behavioral logic. Using integrated data from E-2D and F-35 systems, the Aegis system begins to peel back layers of interference. A fishing vessel will maintain a steady speed and natural trajectory, but a combat asset will reveal behavioral errors. Sudden acceleration to approach a target, maintaining tactical distances in formation, or emitting characteristic electronic signals despite attempts at camouflage. Aegis automatically assigns labels, separating civilian entities from potential threats. The US isn't overwhelmed. They're proactively cleaning up the battlefield. The result of this phase is the creation of a prioritized list of targets. The US has turned the enemy's chaos into a scientific risk management problem. Instead of firing indiscriminately into crowds, the fleet now knows exactly which snakeheads need to be cut off and which disruptive elements can be ignored. The US has stripped Iran of its last shield, infiltration. But locating and classifying targets isn't enough to end the game. Because if the enemy's nervous system still has the ability to coordinate, they can still unleash a devastating swarm attack. To truly master Hormuz, the US needs to take a more ruthless step: disconnect the brains of the entire Iranian system. In network warfare doctrine, Iranian weapons are only truly dangerous when they can talk to each other. A swarm of drones or a single squadron of fast boats is an easy target, but a synchronized system is a disaster. The US understands that to truly control the battlefield, they don't need to destroy every single drone immediately. They just need to make them lose track of their location and who they're receiving orders from. At 25,000 feet, the EA-18G Growler begins a remote lobotomy. Instead of brute force jamming across a wide area, the Growler precisely targets command and control, C2 frequencies. It directly attacks Iran's coordination capabilities, severing the communication link between onshore command centers and offshore assets. When the voice of the upper echelons is silenced, Iranian combat units suddenly become orphaned fragments, losing their ability to coordinate in a coordinated group operation. But the most devastating blow lies in DRFM technology. Imagine this as a giant electronic mirror room. Growler captures radar signals from Iranian missile batteries, copies them, and transmits them back with slightly altered parameters. The result? On the enemy's radar screen, the American fleet suddenly transforms into a giant ghost fleet with hundreds of virtual targets appearing and disappearing in improbable locations. Iran is not only blinded, they're forced to see a distorted reality, leading to wasted ammunition on illusions created by American software. While Growler dominates the skies, American cyber warfare experts attack drone control protocols and coastal communication relays. The US performs a lobotomy on the enemy's operating system. Drone control stations lose control of their vehicles. Coastal command networks are paralyzed by intrusive code. The US doesn't strike the body of the Iranian system. They strike directly at its thinking. This is when the true nature of the campaign becomes clear. America doesn't need to fire a shot to win a battle. They just need to render the enemy incapable of controlling their own weapons. Once their nervous system is severed, the massive Iranian army at Hormuz begins to convulse in disorientation. And that's when America launches the next phase, locking down layer by layer. The enemy's network is paralyzed. Now it's time for American fire units to carry out their mission of isolating the battlefield layer by layer. With Iran's command and control system paralyzed by electronic warfare, the US fleet began the process of freezing the battlefield. They did not counterattack in a single direction. The US deployed a multi-layered locking strategy, ensuring that not a single link in the enemy system, even the smallest, could find a loophole to retaliate. In the air, the top priority was dealing with orphan drones still hurtling forward due to inertia or low-flying cruise missiles. This is where the ESSM Block 2 Evolved Sea Sparrow missile proved its value. Unlike older missile systems that relied on the mothership's radar, the ESSM Block 2 possessed an active seeker. It hunted its targets independently in extremely complex environments where fleet radar could be jammed by strong waves or rocky terrain near the shore. High above, F/A-18 and F-35 fighter jets act as air police, suppressing any attempts at takeoff from Iran's makeshift airfields along the coast. On the surface, US warships with the Aegis system create a no-kill zone. With Iranian speedboats losing coordination from the command center due to being suppressed by Growler, they become isolated targets. Aegis maintains formation, controlling the surface airspace to ensure the kill chain operates smoothly. The US is not just repelling the enemy, they are redefining the boundaries of safety in Hormuz. While the sky ablazes with fire and radar, the quietest battle takes place in the deep waters. Iran often relies on its Ghadr-class mini-submarines, ghosts lurking beneath the sand to launch asymmetrical ambushes. But the MH-60R Seahawk, with its dipping sonar, turned the seabed into a glass prison. The US used sonic pressure to locate and isolate underwater threats, depriving Iran of its last chance to surprise the fleet. On the surface was firepower. On the seabed was the deadly silence of control. At this point, the US didn't counterattack in the traditional way. They locked down Iran layer by layer. The enemy was pushed into a dilemma. In the air was the ESSM. On the surface was the Aegis Fortress, and deep below were the Seahawk hunters. When all layers of space were frozen, that's when the US shifted from tactical control to a system-breaking strike. Note one crucial detail. Throughout the previous 4 phases, the US launched virtually no long-range land-based strike attacks. According to the logic of modern counteroffensives, kinetic firepower, explosives, and steel only truly emerged when 3 conditions were met. Battlefield data was sufficiently clear, the enemy's nervous system was paralyzed, and nearby threats had been suppressed. At this point, the game shifted from containment to the complete dismantling of Iran's war machine. Once the operational corridor was opened by air defense suppression units, Tomahawk missiles began to be launched. Their target wasn't mass strikes against military units, but rather targeted key nodes, the drone control stations that had just been located via heat signatures, fixed cruise missile depots, and coastal command infrastructure. The US didn't need to flatten everything. They only needed to remove the connecting links. Once these nodes are destroyed, Iran's entire dispersed offshore force will be completely orphaned in terms of command. If the operation escalates to a higher level, the US will activate its final card, the GBU 5-7. This weapon is designed to tackle targets unreachable by conventional missiles, strategic missile depots, and command centers protected deep within fortified underground bunkers. This is the ultimate message of overwhelming power. There is no absolute hiding place once the fleet's data lock has located you. When the last command links are removed, the operation ends not with a big bang, but with total paralysis. The US has proven a cruel truth. Whoever controls the data coordination chain has the power to decide when the enemy's machinery will shut down. But after all these multi-million-dollar weapons, what truly constitutes victory? At this point, we must pause to answer a core question. What truly defeated the enemy at Hormuz? Was it the sophistication of the F-35 or the destructive power of the Tomahawk missiles? The answer is neither. Standing alone, the KH-11 is merely an expensive camera in orbit. The E-2D is just a flying radar station. And even the powerful Aegis or Growler are just disconnected pieces of a puzzle. What truly won was the coordinated effort. What the US operated at Hormuz was no longer a linear, old-fashioned kill chain, where if one command link failed, the entire process stopped. Instead, they operated a kill web. In this scenario, coordination is key. The US forces the adversary to transmit signals, uses satellites and E-2D to see them, employs algorithms to classify them, uses electronic warfare to disrupt their neural pathways, uses layers of protection to lock onto nearby threats, and only then uses firepower to strike deep. This is a precise engineering process where data flows between platforms like blood, transforming the entire fleet into a single organism capable of adapting to any variable. America's victory lies in its integration capabilities. F-35 sight for destroyers, Growler's blind cruise missiles, and E-2D's coordinate, the pace for the entire fleet. When every component operates as a single machine, the overall power far surpasses the sum of the weapons combined. It's the overwhelming dominance of systems thinking over individual strikes. At Hormuz, America didn't win with the quantity of bombs and ammunition. They won by turning data into the most terrifying weapon. Opponents may possess powerful missiles, but when facing a system that thinks and acts synchronously as a unified whole, they are not just fighting an army, they are fighting a reprogrammed battlefield reality. So, after all, how did the US respond to the al-Salmi attack? The answer doesn't lie in a single retaliatory shot or a blind show of fire. Washington chose a more complex, colder path. They responded with a complete counterattack architecture. We've seen how the US avoided the passive trap. Instead, they used satellites to confirm the situation, E-2Ds to analyze behavior, Aegis systems to consolidate data, and F-35S to designate stealth targets. They used Growlers to perform a nerve-wrenching operation, ESSMs and Seahawks to lock down every layer of space, before using Tomahawks to dismantle every tactical link in the enemy system. The US didn't respond to al-Salmi with explosives. They responded with the overwhelming force of a thinking network. Iran may have started with a massive physical attack, but the US pulled that battle off the sea and into where they are strongest, information space. In the logic of this campaign, firepower was merely the ultimate execution tool. What truly determined them was which side could transform the initial shock into a complete counterattack architecture more quickly. The US won not because they had more bombs, but because they rendered their opponent incapable of controlling their own battlefield reality. Therefore, what was decided after al-Salmi wasn't who fired first. What was decided was who mastered the multi-layered coordination chain, the US. One, because they made their entire system function as a single machine, turning data into the ultimate deterrent weapon. In a world of destructive networks, will crudeness or sophistication ultimately prevail? The answer lies not in the weapons you see, but in the systems silently watching you from behind. Thank you for joining Navy Codex in the Strategic Report. Please leave your comments on the new balance of power in Hormuz, decoding reality with cold precision. See you in the next decoding session.